All right, folks, good evening, good evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I'd like to welcome you all to the Wanda Coleman Theater and to Remembering Armenian Writers Against Commemoration. Please give it up for our authors tonight. Yay. My name is Jimmy Vega. I am the Associate Director of Beyond Baroque. I'd like to start by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tonga peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent disposition of their land. As an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting Indigenous communities, their stories, and cultures. For those who don't know, Beyond Baroque is Los Angeles' old reimagining itself and becoming the literary home we know it as today. We're based out of the original Venice Cities and help cultivate new writing through our extensive program of writing workshops, readings, and performances. We offer a number of workshops online via Zoom, such as our free weekly Monday night fiction workshop facilitated by Raquel Baker, and our historic Wednesday night poetry workshop currently facilitated by L.A. Johnson. Similarly, we offer several paid in-person and online intensive workshops throughout the year. In May, we have a sonnet workshop with William Archilla and an eco-poetics workshop with Amanda Ackerman, so please do check those out. Aside from our workshops, we offer several readings throughout the year. Next week, we'll take a short break from our readings and performance series to attend the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. So please do visit us at USC, come say hi, buy some books, support the space. And at the end of April, to round out National Poetry Month, we'll host the third annual Poetry Film Festival, showcasing a slate of international poem-based films with a special opening night screening of Life as a Saxophone on the life and art of poet and World Stage co-founder Kamau Daoud, directed by poet S. Pearl Sharp, so please do come back for that and for more. We also offer several memberships to Beyond Baroque, starting at $60 for an individual membership. Purchasing a membership allows us to offer free and online programming as well as our free weekly writing workshops. So please do inquire about becoming a member, and if you are a member, thank you for your support. I wanted to give a warm thank you to all of our staff for making this possible. Quentin Ring, Ivan Salinas, Eric Alberg in the booth, Michelle Raphael, Genesis Perez, thank you for all you do and for making tonight possible. I also want to give a special thanks to the International Armenian Literary Alliance for co-sponsoring this event. Yes, please give it up for them. A big, warm thanks to all of our authors tonight. Special thanks to our hosts, Tanya and Arthur, and an especially warm thanks to Nancy Agabian for rounding us up all together and making tonight possible. So please give it up for Nancy. So I think that's it for me. I do want to welcome our two hosts of the evening to take us away into the night. Please give it up for Tanya and Arthur.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jimmy, for the land acknowledgement and for the introduction. But as Armenians, we understand displacement, and so we'd like to offer a second land acknowledgement before we begin. As we gather and uplift our Armenianness and the ongoing loss of our indigenous land in Armenia and Artsakh, we must acknowledge that this reading takes place on the unceded land of the Chumash and Gabrieleno Tongva people, who are its original and rightful stewards. We invite you to join our sustained commitment to uplifting and centering those in our community who are often erased, and to take your support beyond acknowledgement by going to www.tongva.land and supporting the Land Back movement. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Arthur now.
Hello, everyone. In the words of Terrence Hayes, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and children of the state, welcome. Welcome to Remembering Armenian Writers Against Commemoration. My name is Arthur Kayzakian, and I'm here with Tanya Baronian. And today we are honored to introduce to you the International Armenian Literary Alliance, otherwise known as IALA, an organization that has become a beacon of cultural heritage and literary excellence. This esteemed alliance is dedicated to nurturing and promoting Armenian literary talent, bringing gaps between Armenian literature and the world, and fostering a vibrant community of writers, readers, and literary enthusiasts. Founded by Olivia Katranjian with a vision to illuminate Armenian literature's rich tapestry, IALA has commenced the journey to support writers of Armenian descent and those who contribute to Armenian literature in meaningful ways. The organization was conceived in 2020 because there has never been a platform of this caliber for Armenian writers. Our mission transcends the boundaries of language and geography, uniting voices that echo the Armenian spirit, resilience, and creative force worldwide. Curated events are at the heart of IALA's endeavors, each designed to celebrate Armenian literature's depth, diversity, and dynamism. These gatherings range from literary readings and workshops to awards, ceremonies, and mentorship programs, all aimed at nurturing emerging talents and honoring established ones. A flagship initiative of IALA, the Mentorship Program, offers aspiring writers and translators unparalleled opportunities to learn from seasoned professionals, fostering growth and excellence in Armenian literary creation. Actually, the director, Srmabekian, is sitting here today. Moreover, IALA's events celebrate literature and remind the Armenian spirit of its enduring strength. From commemorations honoring the historical struggles of the Armenian people to gatherings celebrating the joy and resilience of Armenian culture, each event reflects our dedication to fostering a sense of community and shared heritage. Our commitment and advocacy for Artsakh have always been unparalleled as we stand against genocide. In 2020, IALA raised funds for aid in Artsakh with a two-part reading series called Don't Look Away. And in 2023, we hosted a virtual event, Break the Silence, a reading for Artsakh. The need to advocate for Palestine is not lost on IALA, as we have also facilitated a crucial virtual reading to stand with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Who remembers Armenian-Palestinian Solidarities, which was an event that featured both Palestinians and Armenian writers? As we prepare for this wonderful reading today, let us look forward to the meticulously planned future events of IALA. These include literary lights featuring celebrated authors, fundraisers that support the Alliance's noble mission, and informational sessions that invite more individuals to join this inspiring literary community. Basically, we are absolutely honored to be here with you. And what I'd love to do now is to introduce to you Nancy Agabian. Please welcome Nancy.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to see you all. Thank you, Arthur and Tanya, for representing IALA, bringing the LA crew, coordinating us tonight. I just wanted to speak a few minutes about the reading and what's behind our gathering. And so in order to do that, I need to speak a little bit about this time and space. I wanted to let you know, back in 1990, nearly 35 years ago, I took my first poetry workshop here with Michelle T. Clinton. I took my first performance art workshop here with the late Akila Oliver. I taught some of my first writing workshops here, and Beyond Baroque published my first book, edited by the late Fred Dewey. I walked in a young, impressionable, newly out queer Armenian 22-year-old, fresh from escaping my family on the East Coast, and walked out a poet and writer dedicated to social justice. This radical transformation represents many conversations with some of the beloved folks I just mentioned to you, my mentors. and many relationships with so many artists and writers who've passed through Beyond Baroque as a site of free creative expression. I'm so grateful to return to this home during a fraught time of extremism and authoritarianism to continue conversations. And also so honored to do this event with IALA, which, as Arthur noted, has been a leader in socially engaged work as an Armenian organization. So a few words about the title of this event, Remembering Armenian Writers Against Commemoration. And you might hear that as Armenian Writers Anti-Commemoration, which that's allowed. Since this is a place of poetry, I did also want to say my hopes that it could be heard in a multitude of ways, and that the readings tonight will represent and could be something along the lines of Armenian writers up against commemoration, Armenian writers in conflict with commemoration, and thinking about the idea in layered ways. So every year, as you might know, Armenians, on April 24th, Armenians commemorate the Armenian Genocide of 1915, in which 1.5 million Armenians, including our ancestors, were displaced, killed, and driven from their indigenous homeland by Ottoman Turks. In September 2023, over 100,000 Armenians were driven from the region of Artsakh, their indigenous ancestral homeland of thousands of years, in an act of ethnic cleansing and genocide by Azerbaijan. How can we commemorate what happened in 1915 without acknowledging the cycle of genocide continues as long as denial exists and justice fails to be met? And we are living in a time of genocide, or maybe an era of genocide, most visibly in Gaza and in other parts of the world that have seen genocides cycle through their own histories in Congo, Sudan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc. How can we commemorate a genocide without acknowledging and protesting active genocides and the systems that have failed, bringing us to this moment? How can we commemorate genocide while acknowledging the interweaving traumas and hurts among us and you, the audience? How can we commemorate while celebrating the connections and love among us? In remembering, we member, we reconstitute ourselves individually and collectively. So all the readers I've invited here tonight have in some way been acknowledgers and protesters through their brilliant writing and through their tireless work as educators, advocates, and activists. And I'm so honored to be in conversation with all of them, and actually completely thrilled and so grateful that you're all here tonight. Raffi Joe has bridged Armenian and Azerbaijani youth through writing. He has organized what I think is the only Armenian and Native American reading. As Glendale Poet Laureate, he stood up to anti-LGBTQ hatred through organizing and speech. Carene Rose Mekertichyan, who as a Black Armenian woman has taken a leading role in writing about racism in our communities and our intersectional struggles, who as a member and leader of Yerazad Coalition has taken a strong position and advocating for Artsakh alongside many other solidarity causes. And our first reader tonight, who I just met recently through her powerful layered writing on memory and her history in Artsakh, Gina Alexandra Srmabekian. It's really something when you feel connected to someone through writing and then meet them in person. So I'm just really honored that you're here and can't wait to hear your reading. Gina is a writer whose work grapples with transgenerational trauma, memory, and identity. She writes toward her own freedom and toward the freedom of all displaced peoples from Artsakh to Palestine and beyond. She writes about grief and in times of grief because it is the most powerful articulation of love. She is the winner of Ninth Letters 2023 Literary Award for Creative Nonfiction and was a 2024 Words of Witness Fellow at Under the Volcano in Tepoztlan. She is a lecturer at California State University, Northridge, and lives in Los Angeles with her dog, Bailey. So please give a warm welcome to Gina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Nancy, not just for inviting me today and for reaching out, but because it is a real honor to read someone's work, be like, I see myself in this work, and then have them be like, I see myself in your work. It doesn't happen often. So thank you for organizing all of this. Thank you to my fellow readers. Thank you to Tanya and Arthur. Thank you for everyone being here in the rain in LA. I know everyone forgets how to drive, so big ups for being here today. I'm going to read a very short poem about what it feels like for me to wake up with the Palestinian genocide happening every day on our screens. And then I'm going to read an excerpt from my longer piece, an essay I wrote during the blockade of Artsakh after the loss of my grandmother, who was from Artsakh, and about basically the loss of my family and our cultural history. On the night they attack Rafah, I have a dream that I'm on a game show. The host is a clown, his nose blood red. He says, "Can you save them?" The buzzer is just numbers I can't read in a dream. How long do I have left? In the center, a pit of bodies grows younger. All the dead children of Gaza are watching. I tell them, like I tell my niece safely folded in my arms, don't sit so close to the screen. And now I'm going to read an excerpt from my essay. The first story I ever wrote was the story of Artsakh. There was a girl named Artsakh, separated from her father, the king, kept in a cage by the enemy, waiting to be set free. Not my most nuanced work, but I was a child. I remember my grandmother, Tati, quiet and huddled over me as I translated to her. I remember her tears streaking blue ink where they hit the page. I was 7, which meant it was 94, and Tati had been with us for 6 years. 6 years in which she'd lost son and mother and land. In May of 1988, my uncle died suddenly in Yerevan a few months after the first pogroms began in Baku. But in 94, I didn't know this, or why my Tati yelled into the phone long distance to so many different countries to reach her family. I remember thinking my Tati was old then, all in black, hair perpetually tied back in severe knots, never smiling in those days or only ever smiling at me. But she was younger than my mother is now. It seemed to me that when she told stories, they were all in the past tense, as if she'd already seen the end of everything, because of course she had. The only time she broke from the past tense was when she talked about the village and her son. When she spoke about the village and her son, she talked about them as if they were still here. Once Tati said of her son, dead by this time for 30 years, even when I see people's eyes glazing over, I can't help myself. I must speak of him. In my writing, I often think of Toni Morrison's concept of rememory, a subjugation of transgenerational trauma, a knowing that precedes perhaps epistemic knowledge. When people die, we pull them into an archive, their pictures, their recipes, their idiosyncrasies. We invent them again and again to reinstate them into our future without them. Perhaps the opposite of rememory, a rememergency. We aren't remembering, we are raising from the dead the people who we can no longer raise our hands to brush the hair out of their face. We are recalling a future for the dead, a contradiction in which we build new truths about someone who we knew as far and as well as we will ever know them. Necromancy is a difficult undertaking. It needs the roots and the history and the blood of you. Tati fed and fed her whole life the stories of her dead, passed them down to my mother, then to me. In the impermanence, we are creating a new cast for their souls from our stories. We need an audience to remember. We need a village, a people lost in ruins. What we call a thing is important. In the archive, there are folios and manuscripts, palimpsests, those books that fold into themselves endlessly, and accordion out. In archives, I search Artsakh and am redirected to its exonym, Nagorno-Karabakh. The names did not change by era, but by colonizer. Now occupiers call Shahumyan, the province where Tati grew up, the Kalbajar district. Every summer, Tati brought her children to Shahumyan and to my great-grandmother, Olinka. They lived in an idyllic life, chasing through the mountains, climbing the trees in the neighbors' orchards, telling scary stories by firelight. There were rules in the village that there weren't in the city. No running through the high grass for fear of snakes, no swimming in the river if the water was past the waist. And there were different rules when it came time to return to the city too. My mother tells me the most important rule for traveling back through the woods that neighbored Azerbaijan was this one: never speak Armenian on the bus. As I write this, 120,000 Artsaksis who rely on the Lachin corridor for their connection to Armenia and therefore sustenance are being blockaded by Azerbaijani soldiers masquerading as eco-activists. And this systemic purge of our people from their lands we call ethnic cleansing, and we write it down. Soldiers who look indistinguishable to me from my own people, same dark, deep-set eyes, still scream death to Armenians in the videos that have been widely distributed online, still hold up the heads of soldiers as if they were never alive. And we write it down, we write it down, we write it down. The worst part of the occupation of Shahumyan for Tati was that they did not occupy the land, only destroyed it. Before we had the internet, she heard from her kin that their village had been reduced to rubble just for the spite of it. When I was old enough to pull it up, she asked me to find aerial pictures of the lands. The pixelated image was an unreadable grayscale of what looked to be perhaps a pile of boulders in an otherwise desolate valley. She stared for a long time, the screen reflecting on her glasses. "Look," she said, "that was my home," pointing at the empty fields. Because I do not have a land that feels like it is mine, I must turn to the stories of my ancestors to understand a village. From knowing Tati, who, when she had the strength to stand, would limp to the garden to check on her plants, I can imagine what that land meant to my great-grandmother, Olinka. The land which held the bones of our ancestors, which fed the trees that bore the fruit that my Tati grew up eating, that my mother and uncle ate, and that I will never eat. "The plums in Mama's fields are ripe now," she'd always say when summer approached, "and no one's there to eat them." The archives are filled with oral histories as witness and testimony, but to find the proof, we must find the trace. Where were my people? In which country were they hiding? In which century? Instead of looking for their presence, I look for their erasure to find them. Instead of searching the categories, I look at the empty fields. Maybe land, too, is passed down cell by cell, the love of this land. The body grows short and wide with big lungs in the highlands, and here I am, stout and belting in the valley a century and 7,000 miles away. Love is my inheritance. Death, too. I am here to speak of our grief in minute detail until we all agree upon the name, me and Tati and all of Shahumyan and the Marav mountain with the river which swallowed the dead down its banks for centuries before we knew the word genocide. And even when we learned it, we couldn't get it to stick except to say the pictures didn't matter and the whole wing in the basement of the Museum of Tolerance didn't matter and the entire Armenian collection didn't matter. All of the metacarpal bones of the children who had not been dug up because no one has gone searching. All of the four-cornered crosses labeled Anatolia under the fluorescent lighting. I am searching in the archive and I'm finding me folded over and over myself, Tati, the mountains, the water shut off, the gas line, the eco-terrorists, the gray wolves, the white phosphorus, the proof rewritten, the mosques built on top of pillaged Armenian churches. I am searching and I'm finding the proof. I'm finding the ruins. I'm finding the smoking berserker, and what it is the archive. Or the archive is the body of my people, which folds onto itself for centuries and centuries and accordions out. Tati is dead. She will not see what I fear is the chipping away of her country. The children landlocked and freezing in Artsakh will not be warmed by this writing. It's not them who I'm trying to reach. I write this because it is a thing to be born in grief, to be born with knowing, perhaps before epistemic knowledge, that in this world there are those who will kill children in their mother's wombs for being born across a border. It is a heavy thing to watch with weary acceptance as mothers line up in front of government buildings where the telegram has arrived with the names of the dead. This grief can break you like ice under the bow of a ship. It is important to name things. My great-grandfather Badal may have survived years after the war without a way to return home, and we know this because a three-fingered man at a prison camp asked after his son, Rafik, and his daughter, Raya, and someone somewhere wrote it down. In every archive, I look through the black and white photographs to find him, Olinka, Simonami, my uncles, the Shahomiansis I've only heard of in stories. I look for Tati, I look for Tati, I look for Tati. This reality, this deserted them, betrayed them, erased them. So I write this just past this reality, to those who will read the minute details of our grief, those who will take up the names of our dead. I write this because the work of the archivist, like the writer, is to imagine possible futures. It is an act of humanity, an act of love for our future selves. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina, for sharing your truthful and really raw emotions. It was beautiful. Okay, each year, IALA organizes the Young Armenian Poets Awards, or YAPA, a platform that spotlights the budding voices of tomorrow and encourages young Armenian poets to hone their craft and share their unique perspectives with the world. Raffi Joe Wartanian, our next speaker or reader, has been a judge for YAPA since its inception. In addition to this program, YALA proudly offers grants that support the translation and creation of Armenian literary works, ensuring that the beauty of Armenian literature reaches a global audience. These grants are a testament to YALA's commitment to preserving and promoting Armenian cultural heritage through the power of the written word. Raffi is also a judge for our creative writing grants. Raffi Joe Wartanian is a writer, musician, and educator who teaches writing at UCLA and serves as the inaugural poet laureate in the city of Glendale. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, University of Texas Press, No Dear Magazine, and elsewhere. As a musician, Raffi has released 2 albums of original compositions, one called Critical Distance, released in 2019, and the second, Pushkin Street, released in 2013. And I welcome Raffi to the podium.
grateful to be here and excited to share some poems with you. I thought I would start with a new poem, and this one is inspired by a recent family gathering where we were eating delicious food, and I just was like, everyone was silent while we were eating, so I just remarked how, wow, everyone must be enjoying this food quite a bit. And I was met with a very unexpected response, which inspired this poem. So this poem is called Misogyny for Dessert. Tangy tabbouleh, oily dolma, crimson muhamra wrapped around the crevice of a roasted walnut, lips kissed with honey, dough drizzled by orange blossom, rose water rambling into a creamy confit, Levantine flavors gathering on my tongue, flavors so potent I'm stunned into silence, adoration of the melange, paralyzed in pleasure. I can't speak, I can't blink, I can't see, I only chew, jaw moving in unison with those around me, uncles of old world wisdom, the ironworker of Damascus, the jeweler of Beirut, who reminds me that the average Lebanese worker is worse off than the UN-sponsored Syrian refugee. We sit in quiet awe, exchanging glances and guilty grunts, affirming Auntie's culinary virtuosity. I break the silence. When people sitting around a dinner table go quiet, I begin, it's because the food is divine. Auntie laughs. When everyone around the dinner table is silent, she responds, it's because a girl was born. This next poem is about commemorating the Armenian Genocide, which is obviously a very complicated thing. I think the only time I ever felt like it made sense was once in Armenia, I was there, and then once in Istanbul for the 100th anniversary, if there is such a thing as even feeling like you're in the right place. But, I'm from Baltimore, and so I've spent a lot of time in DC and New York, and this poem is inspired by the New York City Armenian Genocide Commemoration, which happens in Times Square, which is a very, obviously it's a very visible symbolic environment, but it's also a very ironic and bizarre environment because you've got you've got all these Armenian priests, you have all these powerful words about human rights, and then you have Bank of America logos, and then Cookie Monster and Superman are walking by. So it's a very, very bizarre environment for me. So I wrote this poem about it. It's called Cookie Monster's Genocide. Cookie Monster came for the sweets, he stayed for the genocide. Superman saw the slaughter in the name of the Father, the Son, and the holy 3% interest rates if you sign up today. Conditions apply to the term. We remember our fallen ancestors. We remember the new smartphone. We remember. We demand recognition for the crimes. We demand the new. We demand. Superman demands pay from tourists for the photo op atop extracted souls' indigenous roots. We prey upon this sacrament, industrialized morality morphing essence into performance, unless performance is the essence and morality is the mask. What remains then is a glowing screen as an empty mirror, as in a forgotten promise, as a flock of rats feast on Cookie Monster's memory cortex. This next poem is inspired by the events in Glendale last June at the school board, which made national news. I'm happy to report that the alt-right fascist provocateurs who attempted to find power in the school board were unsuccessful, but that just happened. Last June, when all of this was going down, we didn't know what would happen. So I wrote this poem in response to this this movement, this I want to call it an alt-right fascist provocateur movement. that we've seen across the country as books are they're trying to ban books in schools, school districts, and marginalize different minority groups, which is the playbook of a genocide. This is called Love is a Jewel, and Glendale is Jewel City as context. Love is a jewel, Sappho's ruby red rhinestone, emerald of elegance encompassing countless forms. Love is the jewel that is straight, curved, crooked, supple. She is not uniform. She is not cruel. The jewel love, however, that bedazzled rainbow, she might be twisted by false prophets peddling distortions. Moral panic mimicking moral dissent. Hate speech dressed in free speech. Theocracy presenting as democracy. Outside agitators disguised as caring comrades. White privilege appropriating minority struggle as in erasure festooned with righteousness. I love seeing through the disguise, for doing so reminds me that knowledge is power, power is love, and love is a jewel inside of us all. All right, 3 more poems. This one is called Ani, and it's about the ancient Armenian capital of Ani, which is a very architecturally and culturally significant place. It's kind of considered like the precursor to like medieval architecture, and today it's in ruins. It's in modern day Eastern Turkey. It's on the indigenous Armenian land, and it was a passage point on the Silk Road, and I've sort of witnessed it twice. One time I was there from the Armenian side of the border, and that's when I wrote this poem. And then a few years later, I went from the Turkish side of the border, and I walked in, and it's in ruins, but it's still profoundly impressive. And if you ever get a chance, I recommend going there. So Ani is also my sister's name, coincidentally, and many Armenians are named Ani. Okay. Are you a city? Are you a person? Are you an angel? Were you my love? Were you my home? Were you always baking softly in the sun? When did the fortress start to crumble? When were the churches scorched to earth? When were crescents cut from crosses? Whose eyes absorbed this unthinkable dismantling? Whose voice was swallowed by the Akhurian River? For how many centuries has that bird sung? For how many revolutions will these bees swarm? For how many miles will this vast chamber echo the dog bark, the church bell, our wavering voices into the bottomless gorge? Is man so stubborn as to think his questions matter? That countries can endure, that species can survive? As our ruins shudder, as population declines, as the black smoke rises over the minaret, chilling a headless church in its shadow, do we see ourselves in you, Ani? Do you return to us as we honor you with namesakes and stories? Or have you hidden forever behind the cloak of history and nation, memory and myth, as we hopelessly try uncovering the mystery and capturing justice in our dogged pursuit of something lasting, something fair, something ours? We as individuals, as a people, as a humanity, bound by the epigenetics of hope and a vision of the future before our very eyes in this fallen city. This next poem is also about the genocide. My grandparents and great-grandparents are genocide survivors, so we grew up with the stories, and then my parents fled the Lebanese Civil War, so you can't really escape it, even if you try to, and I'm sure we've all tried in different ways. So this poem is it's called Phantom Tongue, and I wrote it reflecting on my trip through Western Armenia in 2018. So I got to travel there for 2 weeks, where my family is from, and many other places. Somewhere in the world, my history is erased, my name is changed. Raffi Vartanian, Gala, Raffi Vartanian becomes Raffi Wartanian. Wartanian, like the tan on your wart. Stylized melanoma signifying the end. Or Wartanian, a song of war, death, destruction, murder, nothing I stand for baked into the moniker. Not here, Vartanyan, warrior sons and daughters defiantly defending a people, only to have their nom de guerre lathered like suds swirling down the drain of the car wash on Jackson Street under an American sun baking flesh white, calls for change or at least a discount stifled by the heat. Somewhere in the world, my ancestors' creations are destroyed. Crossstones of a medieval Armenian necropolis on the banks of the Araxes River reduced to rubble. A stone church, Khulavank, in the golden wheat fields of Kharpert, on its crumbling column defiled with a spray-painted swastika. Homes in Hajan, Adana, Zara, and Kumkapı, never to be known, only to be evoked during visits with maps in verse. Their names are ghosts who saunter in meadows of the amnesia I recall, so that sometime in the future I can sit down with my boy, look him in the eye, and have the talk. Will the news destroy his innocence the day I tell him that we were, are, will be objects of genocide? How will he come to understand the unfathomable? A series of moments, by osmosis, lighting candles at the church, the old typewriter hanging on the wall, a grainy image of emaciated corpses, their sunken eyes somehow familiar, protesters demanding recognition from violent nations we now or once called home. Or will he already know? Was it coded in his bones? When will he learn that the imposed tension between erasure and endurance is not just a thing of the past, but a choice today between internalizing the oppressor's will and facing the question, answers illuminating a path fraught with the promise of truth's daggered thorns? Poking holes in our language, endangered, like a fading phantom living in my throat. Gogortus, lezus, spoken to my child, hearing him voice the revenant. On his tongue does she live or die? Maybe both. Maybe none of it matters, especially once we're erased. Have we already arrived? And once we've arrived, can we finally begin to return? And the last poem is a poem I'm still trying to figure out how to write. This is called Portrait of a Fragoli. I don't know how to write about schizophrenia, so I'll write about my brother. During a capgrass delusion, I'm a CIA agent wearing a costume to mimic myself. And with a voice modulator amplifying my vocal cords, I give the aura of a self that I am not. My brother informs me that I'm in on it, that I am it being the project being the nightmare being like this. I don't know how to dream anymore, so I'll write about the nightmare inside which I'm trapped. When he calls, I'm cleaning diapers. When I call, his speech is slurred. The nightmare begins like this. Boil water, grab tongs, clutch device, dip into boiling water, place on cutting board, hoist hammer, swing. The nightmare continues like this. You hear mute voices. You see hidden shadows. You feel imperceptible threats. I cannot save you. You remind me I'm human. I send you a poem about the name you erase, and you won't read it. I found Esme Wang's book, and you said you might get around to it. I can't read you anymore, because I glued you to a pedestal so tall that looking up at it made my neck snap. Head hung on a thread of veins, empty eye sockets spitting optic nerves that tether my eyes to the only view remaining of the pedestal's underside. Meditate twice a day, medicate twice a day, hope for survival. Survival is victory. Maybe we're all just trying to survive. Schizophrenia is your shadow. I don't know how to write about your shadow, so I'll bask in your light. Thank you.
Wonderful work, Raffi. I don't think I'll ever look at the Cookie Monster the same again. Carene Rose Mekertichyan is an artist, organizer, educator, and proud Black Armenian Angelino. Her plays and spoken word have been produced at Edinburgh Fringe, Meet Cute LA, Company of Angels, and Independent Shakespeare Company. She has been published by the University of Texas Press, LAist, the Armenian Weekly, Hybrid Magazine, and Kuiriks. She is co-founder and value steward of Yerazat Coalition, artistic associate for social justice at Independent Shakespeare Company, and program coordinator at Support Black Theater. She teaches with Center Theater Group, Creative Arts, and About Productions, and has guest lectured at USC, UCLA, PCC, Pomona College, and Boston College. Please welcome Carene.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for being here and for having me. It truly is an honor to hold space with all of you. I'm going to be sharing a few poems and also an excerpt from a written work that I had published. And I just want to preface by saying that the poetry that I share is born of my experience as a Black Armenian woman and is always a call for our community and others to show up in intersectional and internationalist solidarity. My selections today cannot be severed from the genocide of the Palestinian people, and it is important for our community to understand that the ongoing genocide and pain of the Armenian community does not exist in a vacuum. And the powers that continue to attempt to erase indigenous and marginalized people globally are interconnected. So we must connect to dismantle all systems of white supremacy and colonialism. And I also just want to say before I jump into this first piece, that when you love your community, you must also be critical of it. This first piece is titled, "If We Back Each Other Up, We Can Return Mountains." Odar, a word my family never used, well, not in that particular way. You know, that way that makes my face hot, wondering if everyone else can see the target between my eyebrows. I thank God I was spared for some time. Odar, other, seemingly one in the same. It's the verb that troubles me. Some would say it others out of love, out of self-preservation, out of necessity. I would say it is a slur, a separation between us and them. Odar, pervasive, a microcosm of our community in one word, our greatest fear, our supposed salvation, a reminder to those who threaten what's left, who's left, protection in insularity, safety in solitude. All we have is each other, and that's all we need, right? Odar, a marker of those within our community deemed traitorous by birth, those whose mixed identity, whose queer identity, whose deviation from the norm threatens our community, what we've been conditioned to think is our community. Odar, this curse turned blessing when a point must be made, when you're one of the good ones, when you act like you're 100%, when you look Armenian, when you are fetishized, when you are seen as an outlier among deviants. So patriotic for a community you're simultaneously destroying, no? Odar, it's funny. Those who use this term to alienate often speak of unity. A unity that doesn't exist, rarely exists, ephemeral. It surrounds me in an instant. Forget-me-nots brush against my heels. An ancient rhythm finds its way to my wrists, my index finger and thumb raised in traffic. Noor juice tints my lips. The smell of fresh matnakash makes the hairs in my nose sway as if cradled by tatik. It fills me, feels me, and my place in our eternity. Dismissal, gatekeeping, a slur, and she is gone. Odar, If we are not a monolith, must they be? Who says they cannot understand? Who says we understand? Who says we don't have shared struggles, shared survival? Who says solidarity is impossible? Those who benefit from lateral violence say so, and we listen. Odar, within this community, outside this community, partner in trauma, partner in resistance, partner in shared liberation. If we back each other up, we can overturn mountains. A proverb, endlessly aspirational, inspirational, universal, full of hope and longing. How soon we forget we are our mountains, returning. This next piece is titled Memorial Day, and it is about my granddaddy on my mom's side, so my Black granddaddy. Memorial Day. It was a source of pride. My granddaddy's service in World War II, nah, he didn't just serve. He had a title, MP. He'd look out for deserters and stuff, Mama would say, like a cop. I'd share my little factoid, clocking the confusion in my white classmates' faces. That's right. My Black granddaddy held a position of power in the 1940s. Ha! It didn't matter that the units were segregated, and this title did nothing to empower his Black body outside of those 4 years he served. I was still proud. I wanted to know more, to ask Granddaddy what it was like, what he did, what he could do at the time. Alzheimer's stole that from me. In the time we shared on this earth, the time I can remember, he didn't really know who I was, or anyone for that matter. Drifting by, a lifetime of disjointed memories clouding his eyes. I still remember his voice, Louisiana honey, cracking himself up so much it became infectious, surprising me with beanie babies, the ephemeral moments when he was lucid, when he knew me. I was a little older then, hoping to make up for lost time. Then it happened. Granddaddy had his homegoing, sent off with a 21-gun salute. As my body shook with each shot, the flag draped over his casket, I wondered, why did this nation do more for him in his death than they ever did in his life? Where was this care in his hospice room? Where was the care for his Black body every other day of his life? I've always found solace in the fact that my granddaddy served in a noble war. Granddaddy was one of the good guys. Uncle Sam, not Tom. Hand over heart as I say the Pledge of Allegiance, the words caught in my throat held back by my ancestors, all of them. Because even in a noble war, we, no, not we, he, no, not he, they. Yes, they were fighting fascism and genocide in one theater while committing those same crimes in the other. Japanese civilians vaporized in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japanese American civilians incarcerated in internment camps. But hey, we beat the Nazis, right? What was once a source of pride has soured with time, with knowledge, with an understanding that the original sins of chattel slavery and indigenous genocide continue. Slave patrols to police officers, plantations to prisons, lynchings of Black and brown bodies to drone bombings of my Swana bodies. My Armenian uncle's car stomped in hatred the day after 9/11. My Black cousin tangled in the vicious cycle of recidivism to this day. Shouldering the weight of my own intersectional harm, Black, Chernoj Hopi, nigger, sand nigger. We need to check your hands for bomb residue, miss. Memorial Day. I still honor my granddaddy, Curtis Andrew Triplett. I honor the Black, brown, and poor youth coerced into the service looking for opportunity and education. I honor those who've returned and struggle with PTSD. I honor the service women assaulted and murdered, Lavina, Vanessa, known and unknown. Don't ask, don't tell, they say. Nah. I honor them as I tear it all down, as I pray for an end to U.S. imperialist military-industrial complex, pray for an end to American terror, foreign and domestic, pray for a return of all indigenous peoples to our land, a return to stewardship, a return to peace. This piece is an excerpt from a longer piece that I had written, published in the Armenian Weekly, titled Lessons from Navart, Beyond Armenian Genocide Recognition. And for context, this piece was published April 24th, 2021, ahead of the official Armenian Genocide recognition by Joe Biden that we knew was, at the time we knew it was coming, so I had written this piece knowing that was coming. So these are parts of that. April 24th has always been a complicated day for me. This day of intense pain for Armenians has always demonstrated the unique beauty and power of collective grief. Amidst the tears, we also celebrate our survival and our thriving diaspora. For my family, this day was always complicated by my granddaughter, great-grandmother's birthday. We felt strange honoring her on a day like this. Her celebrations were always somber. I struggled to write and speak about her because her passing is still painful for me. Granddaughter and I shared a powerful and unique connection. She couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Armenian, yet we were incredibly close and found ways to communicate without words. I cannot discuss my relationship to this day without providing a requiem of sorts for my granddaughter Navart. During World War II, Navart performed with a singing group that traveled the region in Armenia, raising morale along the way. In 1948, she was waiting for her mother at a bus stop near the Armenian Circus building so that they could walk home together. It was then that my grandpappy, great-grandfather, Gheorghe Nasanyan, saw Navart and began speaking to her. What Gheorghe didn't know is that Navart was deaf in both ears at the time, having sustained a recent injury from a snowball to the side of the face in one ear and hearing loss from a childhood illness in the other. Navart's mom came and went, she didn't notice, and Gheorghe continued to talk to her as he walked her home. Finally, she told him she couldn't hear what he was saying as she was deaf, to which he replied that he knew doctors who could fix her hearing. He kept his promise, and they married. Together, they raised 4 daughters, including my tatik, my grandma, Anahit. Gheorghe was a genocide survivor. I always tell the story of how he fled Turkish officers and made it to safety by holding on to the tail of an ox to get across the river. He watched as they took his little brother with them. He was an orphan, as was my papik's mother, Ashken, who lost her parents and all but 2 siblings in the genocide. My papik's father, Suren, was from Srmabekian, which had remained one of the few safe havens for Armenians in which they were not driven out by Turks and Azeris. This, of course, changed in 1991 under Gorbachev. Nakhichevan is now the site of one of the worst cultural genocides in history, in which Azerbaijan destroyed an estimated 89 Armenian churches, 22,000 gravestones, and about 10,000 khachkars. Navart and Gheorghe remained together until he passed away in 1985. Years later, Navart moved to Los Angeles along with the rest of the family, and soon after that, I was born. When I look at the woman I am today, sure of my identity, I remember the parts of me that were shaped by my grandtatik. She loved me unconditionally from the moment she saw me. She loved my blackness. She did not tolerate me in spite of it. She showed me that true connection supersedes language and speech. She always went out of her way to ensure my mother and I were included in the conversations we didn't understand because she knew herself how frustrating and othering a space full of a foreign language could be. She told our family about our royal roots and history. She reminded us that we as people had so much that was stolen through colonialism and genocide. She wanted us to take pride in our culture and family history. This formal recognition of a historical fact is just the start. For too long, the Armenian community has been so focused on a single issue. For there to be true justice, Armenians need reparations for the lives lost, the indigenous lands stolen, and the cultural genocide that continues to erase our ancient sacred monuments, gravestones, and history. True justice will not exist if there are no reparations for these atrocities. Land is not returned, and these oppressive powers remain free to colonize. The United States must also provide reparations for their own genocide of Black and Indigenous people. It is my sincere hope that the members of the Armenian community who are new to organizing continue to fight for Armenian liberation and the liberation of all people. When we stand in solidarity, we are truly unstoppable. Today remains a day of action and remembrance, grief and hope. Today I choose hope. Today my heart sings because I know Navart, Garagan, Ashken, and Suran are smiling on the first step toward justice. Today I hold my ancestors tight and I look forward anticipating the day their cosmic justice comes to fruition. And I'm just gonna close out with a poem that is about my grandtatik, titled Navart. I still feel it, the emptiness in the space you left. You left us. You are always so small, but filled up whatever space you were in. So full of everything good, everything right. There is so much empty and useless space now in my heart, in this life, everywhere I go. Not so sweet anymore. Dim and colorless, I grasp at your light in dreams, hoping to find you again. Everything is heavy without you here. Remembering you, a smile cracks my frigid lips, and I feel you again. Soft kisses, long nails, infectious laughter, whole conversations we had without words. It hurts when I laugh because I can't share it with you. I think about the last words I said to you. I don't know if you were still there, still here, but I hope you were. I hope you heard me. I will carry roses with me until I see you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carene. I had so many comments I wanted to follow up with, including how beautifully, wonderfully musical the quality of your words were. And then I wanted to shout out like amen after you spoke about your great-grandfather and now the emotional connection with your grandma. Thank you for sharing that with us. It really has been a wonderful evening, and I'm very excited to welcome our final speaker, Nancy. Nancy Agabian is the author of the recent novel, The Fear of Large and Small Nations, a finalist for the PEN Bellwether Prize and the Forward Indies Prize. Her previous books include Princess Freak, which was published by Beyond Baroque, a collection of poetry and performance art texts, and Me as Her Again, True Stories of an Armenian Daughter, a memoir shortlisted for a William Saroyan Prize. In 2021, she was awarded Lambda Literary Foundation's Jean Cordova Prize for Lesbian Queer Nonfiction. a longtime writing professor at NYU. She also leads creative writing workshops in community, including at Beyond Baroque from 1994 to 1999. And she is a founding board member of the International Armenian Literary Alliance. Let us welcome Nancy.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Raffi, Gina, and Carene. It's so hard to break silences, and I so appreciate all the silences you broke tonight and all the truth and emotion you shared with us. So as I mentioned earlier, Beyond Baroque is really a beloved home to me. I can hardly believe I'm here. This place has so much, it's like in my dreams and in my heart and in my body. And I just feel so fortunate. One reason I think it has taken so much hold is I met a life-changing teacher here, the poet Michelle T. Clinton, who I mentioned earlier, who is just a phenomenal, brilliant artist, and she's a good friend. She writes about trauma, injustice, and truth as a queer Black woman, through a uniquely spiritual and fiercely powerful voice. So back in the day, she taught a multicultural poetry workshop for women in which intersectionality was a goal. We exercised the personal as political and unpacked the ways racism, sexism, homophobia, and other injustices threaded through our lives using the tool of poetry. So I wanted to read a poem I wrote during that workshop during the LA insurrection of 1992, which we called a riot at the time. And I guess I'd like to say that it should be thought of as one voice in a chorus, that all of us in the workshop wrote about what we were seeing and experiencing at the time. And it was, a true act of poetry giving us process. So this is called There Is Almost Too Much Race, Color, Creed to Think About. It's the riot summer, and I'm unstable. Things are worse than puberty, 7th grade, but there are no pretty suburban pictures safe playing by my eyes. When I walk to save on drug, I get a gross noise thrown at me at least once by a male species. I spent green grass and humid bug screeches up my nose and ears, running through fields down your house to make up Charlie's Angels games and kiss littler girls on the mouth. School had mimeograph, purple ink, and giggle friends. You are smarter but darker than everybody else. Why are you brown? Oh yeah, I am. You have a mustache too. Oh no, I'm ugly. I covered my upper lip with my cupped hand, and my mouth and voice were gone. Armenian school every Friday, where they spoke a language of hate the Turks. They killed us, taught in between cheap snacks and textbooks. I was too American stupid to get or speak it. Shame for each culture built in my dumb eyes. Lock the door, we are going through the bad neighborhood, my mother said. So I pushed down the knob and over my finger out the car window, moving Black people across gray Boston sky streets. We're gonna come get our white Armenian family if we didn't secure the station wagon. My mother said so. My best friend was Turkish and wore designer jeans and headbands. We looked at each other alike next to everybody else white. Don't you know they killed us? Mr. Armenian history professor, incredulous at my 12-year-old just want to be friends with someone confused culture else. She didn't kill me. Adult Armenians with American racism, like the sixth graders at school, already got my inferiority complex good. 1988, college London summer, where they called Indians and Pakistanis black bastard, this street lady screamed at me, black bastard, and I didn't get it at first. I'm not black, I'm white. You have no right to do that to me. Until I realized then I didn't want to be black or even dark. The English always spoke to my pale blonde friend when we were together and ignored me like I was stupid for my skin color. And I always thought I was one of them. But no, I was a stupid dark person from my own prejudiced mind. Sevyev Jedmag means black and white in Armenian. My mother uses it to point out the sin of interracial couples in public so she won't have to show her stupidity out loud. If you ever want to kill me, marry a black man, my mother says. I scream my outrage at her. After an hour, my brother says it's pointless to argue her racism. She'll never learn. And I can see he's almost right. It has taken me years to learn. I'm embarrassed to be dark-skinned, and it's wrong. I live in a smog city now, with multicultural, far from family and East Coast values. The police here beat up a black man, and the jurors just didn't get it. Took a riot for me to see what was going on inside myself, and still I'm not sure what or who I am in an assimilated country. Proud to be an American. Fuck that. I have white privileged guts and a brown exterior, and my naive body was shocked when the city fell apart. There is almost too much race, color, creed to think about. So continuing on the thread of multiculturalism, but in a different context, I thought I would read from my novel about Armenia. So this is a 2007 blog post that describes a visit to Tbilisi, Georgia, which neighbors Armenia. And I hope it could be a reminder of the impossible connections that people can make, like in a writing workshop, even though capitalism and power can distort relations and create violence across and within borders. So this is from February 2nd, 2007. The week before he was killed, it was dismal in Yerevan. Snowy, cold, bleak. There were a few days when I woke up between 1 and 3 p.m. with nothing to do but read and buy food at Urartu, the corner market. I was hoping the winter malaise would be broken by traveling to Tbilisi with Seyran when I got the news. An article had been forwarded to my inbox, subject, Turkish Armenian writer shot dead. Though I had a feeling who it was, a shock jolted through me as I read that Hrant Dink had been gunned down in the street outside of his office at Agos, the Armenian paper he had founded in Istanbul. I was disheartened that someone who had consistently opened dialogue in Turkey about the Armenian Genocide had been murdered so ruthlessly. Even though they faced charges in the highest courts for insulting Turkishness, Dink and other high-profile writers had been broaching the subject of the Armenian Genocide. Despite pushback and protest, academic conferences on the genocide have been held over the past few years. Most notably, prominent Turkish citizens have been coming forward to announce that a grandparent was an Armenian genocide survivor. Even if their ancestors had been renamed, converted, and cleansed, Turks have been learning that Armenia and Armenians are part of Turkish history, also sharing blood. All that good news now seemed to be dead, with the image of Dink face down on the concrete. So I'm going to skip ahead a bit to describe this trip to Tbilisi. Once we disembarked in the city, we entered an eerie parallel universe. Upon finding the nearest subway station, we discovered that it looked exactly like the Yerevan metro, built in the same Soviet style and scale. Up above ground, I encountered people with noses and eyes outlined in striking shapes, like Armenians, but they were filled in with a lighter coloring. The Georgian language rang a close pitch in my ears, and the script on the signs, though unintelligible, echoed the Armenian alphabet's curves and swoops, both alphabets designed by the same medieval linguist, Mesrop Mashtots. Going to Tbilisi was like opening a hidden door in your own home to discover a new room with the same scents and sounds. Unlike in Yerevan, Tbilisi signs and posters are mostly in the native language, hardly any in English, and absolutely nothing printed in Russian. Ethnic enclaves in South Ossetia and Abkhazia have enlisted Russia's aid to break away from Georgia, so relations have not been cordial between the Georgian and Russian governments. But it wasn't until I read a newspaper that I realized they had been completely cut off from each other for a few months. Georgians had arrested 4 Russians for espionage at the end of September. So Putin, yes, he was in power even back then. So Putin imposed postal and transport sanctions. The Russian ambassador was only now returning to Tbilisi, but there were no flights, trains, or buses to Russia, with no way to send mail or get a visa to Russia. As Seyran spoke Russian to people, I worried that we might resemble Abkhazians or South Ossetians. A few people detected his Armenian accent, including a hotel clerk, a woman taking tickets in an amusement park, and a man selling sneakers at an outdoor market. They all turned out to be Armenian. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. About 500,000 Armenians live in Georgia, around 100,000 in Tbilisi. During the 19th century, more Russians and Armenians lived in Tbilisi than Georgians. My friend Anahid at the university told me, Armenians built that city. The most surprising response to Seyran's accent came from the guy at the sulfur baths. Seyran had just laid face down on a ceramic tiled table by the pool when the guy, a large tank of a man in bathing trunks, dumped a bucket of water over him and asked if he were Azeri. Seyran had told him no, he was Armenian. The man revealed that he was Azeri, then proceeded to converse in Armenian. It turned out that he had learned the language from his Armenian neighbors. We were in a section of town, he told Seyran, where Armenians, Azeris, Turks, and Kurds had long lived together peacefully. My mind was blown, realizing that their families had been friends before the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, maybe even before the genocide. Perhaps they could form and keep close relationships in a city where they were outsiders, where the Georgian-Russian troubles in the present affected their daily lives more than land and history disputes across borders. It was the day after Dink had been buried, and this man scrubbed my naked body with a nubby mitt. After a few days of tepid showers at the B&B and tromping around the filthiest parts of Tbilisi, my skin was rubbing off in gray bits. I was embarrassed, but the Azeri man didn't seem to care. He officiously tapped me with 2 fingers as a signal for me to flip over as he thoroughly scrubbed my shoulders, arms, and hands, my chest, breasts, legs, back, and butt. I giggled when he rubbed the underside of my feet and was only slightly miffed when his mitt brushed my clit. At one point, he filled up what looked like a pillowcase with soap and air, then squished it down onto my stomach, creating a cloud of soft suds. When the Azeri man rinsed me off and shook my hand, I felt relaxed, renewed. The term ethnic cleansing is a euphemism for the dirtiest forms of human behavior: killing, mass displacement, repression of language, and erasure of culture. At the sulfur bath in Tbilisi, we repurposed the term for what it could really mean: honor, care, and intimacy among neighbors. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I am honored and humbled to be in your presence and to hear all of your work, honestly. Thank you again, Gina, Carene, Raffi, and Nancy. We are now going to move to the question and answer portion of our evening. I wanted to invite the four of you here onto the stage, or at the seats at least. Should we sit here?
Yes.
So we're going to begin with some facilitated questions, and then we'll open it up to you, our esteemed audience, to ask the artists. So do you want to start with the first question?
All right, this is for...
I think there's a mic there, too. Yeah.
Okay.
Use your teacher voice.
All right. So I'm just going to ask this, okay? All right.
Yeah.
All right. Can you each share about your artistic identity and how it came about? How does your artistic identity inform your Armenian identity, and or vice versa?
Go in order, maybe. Raffi.
Origins of artistic identity.
Yes.
Okay. I consider, well, I really believe in this Buddhist adage that the self is always changing. There is no constant self. So anytime I try to say that my identity is this, that, or the other, it's already changed. So I never attach myself personally to any form of an identity, because what I have found is anytime I did try to do that, it felt very unnatural. And like, for example, whether I was like writing, I'm writing a poem, I'm writing an essay, I'm writing a song, I'm, working on this, working on that, like what does it all add up to? I don't know. It's just me. Whatever it is, it's just what I'm doing in that moment. And so, I just really follow whatever is the most energizing and what feels most energizing and what feels most authentic to me. And that's really, and so I guess trying to express that through creative projects and other projects, for me personally, seems to be what is authentic in the moment.
I would say for me, growing up, I am an only child, and I always was someone who was drawn to storytelling from my parents, and it was a way that I would entertain myself and them. I was always that kid who was, hamming it up and writing novels, and like the novels that I thought I was writing as a 5-year-old. But my mom and dad always made sure that I knew from a very young age my history, the importance of our history, the importance of everything that my ancestors survived and how that informed the way that I was navigating the spaces that I would be navigating. And as I grew up and grew into my artistry, I would say that it informs all of the work that I do as a playwright, as a poet. It informs the projects that I choose to take on. As a performer, from a performer standpoint, I always say that my body and presence alone is a political act, taking up space on a stage, looking at the way that my body, my Black Armenian body, interacts with the other bodies on stage, being very aware of, a lot of times, specifically for performers, people will talk about things like being colorblind or colorblind casting. That happens a lot in classical work, and I do a lot of Shakespeare, but it's important, I always say, to be color conscious and to be aware of who, if you only have one person on stage who is Black or is of a certain body type or is queer, like how is that person interacting with the other bodies on that stage? What are the decisions that are being made when you are putting someone in that space? And I think we're starting to see that shift now. But all art is political, and all art comes from storytelling. Is a thing that human beings have been doing since the beginning of time. It's how we continue to share our histories and oral tradition, and it's very powerful. And also as an educator, the arts are very important in our schools, so that's another big thing that I push for.
Oh, yeah.
There's too many questions.
All right. I spoke a little bit as my origins really here at Beyond Baroque. I think one thing that keeps propelling me creatively as I do write to figure out things that really bother me or trouble me. It's like a life tool. And as I often tell my students, I really firmly believe the stories we feel compelled to tell are the ones that people need to hear, because often they connect to silences or systems of power or injustice. And what I think, in tying it to the Armenian part of me, I think there's just this constant battle against erasure, and it feels like for however many years I've been writing about my Armenian identity, my Armenian family, Armenian stories, it's this just incredible silence that people don't know enough about it. And I think that's, evidence of what genocide does, but it also, I think, teaches me about all other kinds of injustice and genocide. So I also think of writing as a tool of learning, that it keeps connecting me to other histories and stories. And one reason I'm so grateful for everyone tonight.
I think for me, I, similar to what many of you said, learned to tell stories from my grandmother and my mother. My grandmother was a big storyteller, if you knew her. And I learned stories from her, and then I started writing, and I spent a long time trying not to write Armenian stories. And I was doing that because I wanted to distance myself. I didn't want to just be Armenian. Like a decade ago, I had a reading, and after my reading, they put on this is not shaped by the way, groundwork, excellent music choices. This is an Armenian reading, so that's fine. But we were not reading about Armenians, and I finished the reading, and they put on Jehovah Zurna in the background, and I was like, I did not read about that. That's so strange. Also, it was so happy. It was like, festive music. I was like, my reading was very sad. Thank you so much. But they were like, an Armenian, a token Armenian, we're gonna put the music on. And I just spent such a long time being like, I don't want to just be an Armenian writer. But obviously what happens is that if you don't write about something, that's all you're writing about is like the absence of that thing. And all I was writing about was my missing parts of my culture, my missing parts of my family. The stories that I was not telling were the stories that were constantly bubbling up. And they were the more important things. The thing I was looking at was the most important thing, as usual. So then I thought about what Audre Lorde says. I'm going to butcher this, but Audre Lorde is a Black queer feminist scholar, and she said, find the work that you can do and do it. And I was like, where am I most useful? Like, where can I actually do this work that I want to do? And it was here. It was at Beyond Baroque. Thank you so much. No, I'm just kidding. It was here. It was in my own culture where the problem starts and also the love is. So, yeah.
Thank you. Kind of on the heels of that, how do you see your work intersectional with other struggles? And again, this is to all of you. Maybe Raffi, you can start us off.
I think that, to be Armenian is to be human, and which sounds like a very obvious thing to say. But I think one thing that frustrated me, well, I'm from Baltimore. My parents are from Lebanon. I didn't grow up around many Armenians. Though at home, our life was very Armenian, but then outside it was like, shaggy hair lacrosse players. And then Baltimore, the city of Baltimore, which is predominantly African American. But there weren't many Armenians. So I always thought of Armenians as sort of this invisible minority, and then I was always very surprised when we would go to Lebanon almost every summer to visit my grandparents, aunts and cousins. So, especially in Baltimore, it just seemed to me that there was always this gesture to be made to try to connect the Armenian experience to this greater human experience. And I would go to, my mom would drive us an hour every Sunday to Armenian school, which made my culture feel like a performance and a test, and a long drive. Who wants to go to school on the weekend? But that really frustrated me because, I don't know, it just made the culture feel like a test. And though I was very grateful for the people I met and the things I was exposed to, so I always felt like I had to try to connect. I think because of those circumstances for me, I always felt like I had to try to relate myself to these broader human concerns that were not, that trying to find like what is it about being Armenian that I could try to convince my white friends or African American friends or Jewish friends that, you should care about this because like here's the common denominator that makes us have a lot more in common than you might realize. So that contextual experience for me always had me thinking through the lens of what is our shared humanity, what is our shared experience, and so I've always kind of tried to think through that lens. And anytime I notice a situation where there is that common denominator, it just jumps out to me. So like, I guess obviously the big example and obvious example today is the genocide being perpetrated upon the Palestinians of Gaza, and seeing what is happening to them, reading the accounts, reading the doublespeak from the American government and the Israeli government, and the contortions to try to justify this is shockingly very similar to the accounts I've read from my own grandparents and great-grandparents and all the different Armenian genocide testimonies that we've heard, not just from 1915 to 1923, but to see Azerbaijan perpetrated, and then again to see the American government, twist itself in knots into trying to, double speak its way to some sort of half-truth. So, for me, the common denominators are always jumping out.
Intersectionality is at the core of my work, my organizing, my writing, and who I am, being Black and Armenian. Growing up, it was a journey for me navigating, not navigating the Black community, because again, we still have the Black community overall, and we know this is a very accepting community of folks who are mixed, and that can be traced back to like one drop rule things, but all Black Americans, because of the legacy of chattel slavery and rape, we come in all different shades. The Armenian community, that is something that I have and continue to navigate, and it's something that no matter how much work you are doing, no matter how Armenian you are, there will always be people who feel that you alone, you and your existence is, and that's part of the piece that I read first, are a threat to our community. And I was always kind of searching for that acceptance outside of my family, because I didn't feel that. Growing up, I grew up here in LA, and it's definitely, things have gotten better and it's changed quite a bit, but they're walking around with my parents when they were together, there was a lot of comments and looks and racism, even from, more extended folks in the family. And I never really felt that I would ever truly be accepted in the Armenian community. And our community also has a problem with this need to have this proximity to whiteness and this need to fall into the model minority myth. And that's something that I've only just recently started to see change. Armenians talking about our indigeneity, that was not really a thing, and that's something that started to grow more since the genocidal attack on Artsakh in 2020 and everything that has happened since. So I appreciate seeing that shift and more of a kind of understanding of how we connect with other folks. But it's always this vicious cycle in our community where it's like, no one reaches out to us, no one supports us, no one shows up for us. When there are people who do support and there are people who show up, but we as a people have to show up for other folks. And it's also a very specific thing too with the Los Angeles Armenian community has come up in a lot of the works that you heard today. There is a problem with reactionary, very harmful, racist, white supremacist, homophobic, transphobic behavior in our community that also makes it difficult to reach out or to try and connect with people and say, listen, this isn't everybody. This is a very loud minority of folks in our community. So I'm always trying to reach out through the work that I do with Yedizad to all of the communities that we can, because that is the only way that we will get anywhere. In the work that we need to do, we have to show up all together, and it felt like that was starting to shift and change. But in June of 2020, when everyone was suddenly like, "Oh, America is actually racist," what? But there's been backsliding in that, and it's one of those things too. When we talk about police brutality, when we talk about all these things, the Armenian community also needs to remember that whiteness is something that was earned. Whiteness is something that was, legislated. Armenians were not always considered white in this country, and we all have our many, many experiences that we have had, whether it's getting your hand swiped for bomb residue when you are going to the airport, or remarks that people make, or the redlining that Armenians used to experience. It's still very real. So acknowledging the privileges that we have, but also acknowledging the way that we are marginalized is critical, and using that to build bridges is important.
Yeah, and I think hearing you both speak about intersectionality makes me think of like the work we do within Armenian community, and also how you said so beautifully about building bridges with others. Like a lot of my work about being queer in Armenian is obviously intersectional. I have been an LGBTQ Armenian activist for many years, and the intersections with feminism and Armenians as having this kind of duality of being white and being not white, and using that as an experience to call up the structure of racism and to testify against racism against people of color, is something that I've written about. And just this, as I said before, kind of writing about a question or a problem and the way it comes out in the writing, taking time to really learn. Part of my journey as a writer was researching my grandmother's genocide story. And at the time, I was teaching in Queens, a very diverse immigrant community. And as I was learning about her experiences and also talking to my parents' generation, I kept hearing and seeing similar patterns in the stories my students would tell about their immigration stories. And so when 2016 happened, Donald Trump was elected, and like living in the immigrant community and doing work with immigrant students for many years, the kind of hatred and backlash against my neighbors was very compelling to organize and make that, I think, trying to seize on one issue, and that felt like the most important at the time, at that moment. And now, like as you were saying, Raffi, about, I just feel like you can't help but see all the patterns in Palestine that we've learned about through our family stories. And I can't help but seeing my grandmother in the children in Palestine. And so feeling compelled to organize, feeling compelled to write, they get really intertwined. And that's it.
Again, everyone has said great things, so I'm just gonna shortly add on. When I read the essay when I was getting it published, it got picked up, and then the time that I wrote it, which was the blockade, to the time that we were ethnically cleansed from our lands, the essay was going into publishing, and I was like, I need to come back in and tell them that now Artsakh is basically going to be extinct. I was like, can I do a postscript? And they said, yeah, just write like a postscript and explain what happened. And I said, okay. And postscript was October 6th, and then October 7th, yeah. So October 6th, I wrote this postscript, and I was devastated, and it was very cynical. And I said, we watched our people die, and the community, global community, was like, we're very concerned. And it just kept going, we're very concerned. I hope that's not true. I hope that there's people, we'll have to have peacekeepers come check to see if these things are happening after everyone has already left. And I thought, how could we just watch this happen again? And that was October 6th. And then now it's just, of course we can watch it happen again. I think the thing that makes me feel like everything I have to do is intersectional, and it's a moral imperative if I feel like I knew what genocide was before I knew so many other things that would make me an adult. I was like 5 years old when I knew what a genocide was. I remember my grandma watching, my parents are here today, I don't know what movie this was, the one with the guy they walk down, she kills her child so that it won't be a Turk. What is that? I don't remember. Anyway, if you guys remember, huh? Georg Masbetui, thank you, Mom. As they, I'm watching this movie, I remember watching that movie and thinking, those are my people. That could happen to me. People can kill you just because they want to. And it was such a profound thing to understand as a child that for the rest of my life, I was like, whoever it was happening to, I was like, it's my moral imperative to say, we can't do this again. every time I see it, it's just my moral imperative. I have to say it because I know. And I think probably that's what part of the writing is.
I want to thank you so much for your brilliant work today. I'm honored to be here with you, and Tanya's honored. I think this speak for both of us. This will be our last question, and then we'd love to turn it over to the audience for any questions that you may have. We are all Armenian. No pun intended on our joining anthology. But we are all Armenian, but we all share a common peril. We come from different places, right? So some of you have already touched on this question, but why should the Armenian community be engaged with what's happening in Palestine? Oh, and anyone can answer.
Okay, I'll start. I kind of ended on that note, so I'll start from that note again. I think we should be engaged in any kind of, again, I really do think that we can be the arbiters in our own understanding of what has happened to us. We can use that as our own imperative to stand with people when we see that they are being put through the things that we have been put through, whether that be in Los Angeles, like you said, it's the commemoration of the April 24th commemoration, which we all said we had difficult or different experiences of, for me was always like G-Wagons with like giant Armenian flags and like horovats outside, and I was like, what is it? What are we doing? The Turkish consulate's closed, what are we doing right now? I think the parts that I really emphasize in my own Armenian culture, like the way I understand myself, is to be like, where can I find my place to do the work with everyone else? Because this is the work that we need to be doing. It's the work that I was born into. So I think, of course, Palestine right now is of course, there's many intersecting, unfortunately, genocides happening. Palestine, we have to be involved because we are human beings, first and foremost, and we have to be involved because it is our job, because we know we can be involved, because we know what happens when you don't get involved, and we won't let it happen again.
I think the question, I don't know if I can answer it specifically for Armenians, but Armenian Americans, I think, given that our government, the US government, has largely funded and supported this genocide, we have a moral duty to speak out. There's, connections between, like Gina's essay and everything you just said, that we just saw this ethnic cleansing unfold. Raffi said it too, so I'm not going to repeat it, but we just saw this ethnic cleansing of Artsakh Armenians, like right before what happened when Hamas attacked Israel, and this genocide unleashed onto Palestinians. The connection between is Israel selling arms to Azerbaijan, but also I think we see so many connections. There are Armenians in the Jerusalem quarter who are being oppressed right now, and the Armenian quarter is under threat in Jerusalem for some of the same systems of colonialism and power. And I think also Armenians have a lot in common with Jews. We have an Armenian nation that's made mistakes, and we see it, and I don't want to make like a flat out comparison, but just to be in alliance with Jews who are anti-Zionist, I think is really important, that we can differentiate between nationalism and civilians being murdered versus a war. I think we understand and see what that is. So
and science speaking so imperfectly. I feel like it's a hard topic to discuss, but an important one.
Yeah, I like probably everyone here every day feel like I am losing my mind and just screaming in a room, and no one either is willing to hear or is too scared to actually listen and speak up. And I appreciate that we're saying this and that we're having this conversation, but it's always like that question. I'm like, how is there any other answer? I don't understand how it is even complicated for people based on the horror that we are seeing every day. Yes, we can talk very specifically about the fact that the US government is funding this, is being funded by our tax dollars. So that is billions of dollars that is not going to all of the things that we need domestically, all the things that are supposed to be supporting American citizens. So there's like that basic level of things that oftentimes we have to share to get people to be thinking a little bit critically about the genocide that is actively happening. But from a human standpoint, from a moral standpoint, we often talk about, and a lot of, all of the incredible organizers of the Jewish Voice for Peace are always saying we talk about never again for anyone. And we see history repeat itself so many times constantly. We talk about there are genocides happening right now that no one is talking about. We talk about Sudan and Congo and Tigray. And yet we watch these cycles continue. We fall into this, hatred and lateral violence for each other without thinking about the war profiteering and everything that has to do with the land and oil and the people who are actually responsible for all that is happening. And if we could, as human beings, step outside of the little things and the histories and the issues that we have with each other, there's just so much change that could happen. And it's maddening seeing what is happening right now, and that we are all so scared to just speak what we are seeing. Say, hey, water is wet. Okay, we're seeing this. It's not even stuff that's debatable, and we talk about both sidesism, right? And this is something that we Armenians have become very, very used to, seeing all this and hearing this and seeing media bias in the way that they will describe certain people who died, right? And then other people who have been killed, and media literacy being important. And I think what I will say on a hopeful note is I have never seen the discourse reach the place that it is right now, where people are really starting to talk about and acknowledge what has happened over the last 75 years. When we look at what was happening in Artsakh, when we're talking about a 9-month blockade before they completely ethnically cleansed the region of 100,000 plus indigenous Armenians. And then we're looking at what's happening in Gaza, and there was a blockade, 16-year blockade. We look at what's been happening since the Nakba in 1948, and everything is there. Everything is there for all of us to see. And I'm tired of looking every day on my phone and seeing the horror and parents, and we shouldn't have to completely focus on children, but it is me as an educator, so that's where I go. But all of it is horrible, but that we can watch this happen and people will still try to justify it or dance around it it's really horrifying. And it shows me how, when we're in history class and when we're kids and we're like, wow, I can't believe if people really saw what was happening, that wouldn't have happened, this wouldn't have happened. Well, what you would have been doing then, you are doing right now. So take stock with yourselves about what that is, and if you will feel comfortable with the way that future generations are going to look on what you did at this time.
I think it was the genocide scholar Israel Charney who said that the final step of a genocide is to deny that it happened. And so in that sense, especially if we think about the Armenian Genocide from 1915 to 1923, and then Azerbaijan's project to advance the Armenian genocide, it's still happening. When denial is the final step, the genocide never ends. It just keeps happening because now it just becomes an assault on our memory and our ability to remember. And the reason and so what that then creates is permission structures for other perpetrator nations to commit genocides with impunity, as long as you have enough power and muscle and propaganda machinery behind you. And so that's what we're seeing happen. That's what we've seen happen to the Armenians of Artsakh. It's what we're seeing happening to the Palestinians of Gaza and the West Bank, to the Armenians of the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem, and many other places in the world. We should care because we're human, and we should care because this could happen to any of us ultimately. If it's allowed today to happen to this group under these conditions, it could happen to any of us. And I think sometimes it's very like part of this cognitive distortion or the bizarreness of looking at it from where we are is that how can this happen to us right here, right now? I mean, I think part of it is that our memories and the information we're being provided is heavily coerced and tinged with the kind of doublespeak that tries to create these permission structures. And so we should care because it's happened to us, it's happening now, and it will continue to happen again if we don't call it what it is. The other reason, as Nancy was mentioning, is that Israel sells weapons to Azerbaijan. So this is like, in a sort of geopolitical sense, there's a very clear military alliance. The part that really makes my head spin is that, Azerbaijan and Turkey are, of course, like peanut butter and jelly, and Turkey supports Hamas. So why is Israel selling weapons to a country that partners with a Hamas supporter? To me, I think ultimately what's really happening is that, and this is something that you were alluding to, is that it's not just, I think if you look at the common humanity that connects an Armenian and a Turk, an Israeli and a Palestinian, or any people we're told are in a conflict with each other, there's actually so much more that unites them. And look no further than Georgia and Nancy's amazing chapter about like reframing the idea of ethnic cleansing, an Armenian and Azeri. In the country of Georgia, all these people live side by side and they find a way forward. A lot of these conflicts are used to sort of justify the military-industrial complex. There was a quote I read that said something like, we used to supply weapons in order to provide weapons for the war, and now it's that we just have a stockpile of weapons and we invent wars to just justify that business. And I think that the common Armenian and the common Turkish person, the common Palestinian and Jewish person, no, these people are not looking for war and this kind of violence and hatred. These are geopolitical calculations and, money, war, power. And the last thing I just want to say, and this sort of touches on the solidarity point earlier, so Thursday, April 25th in Glendale, I'm organizing a reading. It's going to be called Poets Against Genocide, a commemorative solidarity reading. So we'll have Armenian, Palestinian, Jewish, Turkish, LGBTQ+, writers coming together to read. And so in the spirit of like that solidarity and why we should care, we're going to continue to explore that theme. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'd like now to turn it over to the audience if you have any questions for the readers tonight. Yes.
Are there any traditional Armenian spiritual and mystical practices you guys derive personal power from in your work?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
Yeah, are there any traditional Armenian spiritual or mystical practices you derive personal power from in your work?
Yes, I don't know if there's a spiritual practice. I'm not very religious at all. But I think my spirituality is very tied to my culture. And I think that in my experience of my culture, that's where in everyday culture, the things that we're doing that are called, spiritual or kind of markers of ritual are the things I do to remember my culture all the time without thinking about it. That is the ritualized part. Drinking Armenian coffee and looking at the cup to see what it says at the end, that's ritualized, even though it's not something, even no one has to be in the room with me, but I'm going to do it. I want to see what it says. So reading my coffee cup or, reading about the old kind of pagan history of the Armenians and the really kind of bring that into my own writing. But just small things that I've learned from my, grandmother or from village stories that she told me, it's ritualized now, it's part of who I am, and I don't think of it separately from myself, so it's hard for me to answer what are the things you're tying from. I guess it's it is what I do, it is who I am, and that's where my spirituality kind of comes from.
I also crochet. My grandmother taught me at a young age, and it's not the same as Armenian needle lace, but there is a connection that needle lace is a traditional, it's not necessarily spiritual, but I actually do feel crochet is spiritual. I find it meditative, it helps heal me, and I've written about that practice and how it's gotten me through difficult times. And one aspect that I wrote about is crochet is a spiral. I'm not sure if needle lace is, but you often, crochet is often based on a spiral pattern. And the Arevachach, which is the sun cross, is a symbol, an eternity symbol. And so when something I do personally kind of connects with a spiritual practice, then I'll write about it, but I don't actually seek it out. That was just kind of an accident.
Yeah. I would also say for me it's more rooted, my spiritual practice is definitely rooted in Christianity, both my Black side, my Armenian side. But as far as my writing, I would say, and my art and all of that comes from the traditions that we share, and just feeling the tradition of the storytelling has been shared with me and my ancestors. Literally being there, holding me in space with me and in communion with me. But my Armenian family is they're former Soviet Armenians, so they weren't practicing as much at the time when they came here in 1991. But yeah, so it wasn't really as much of a thing for them, but it's definitely rooted in that.
I like to light incense, home. I love it. I love it. It helps me center myself. I also, I love the oud gives me a lot of ideas for writing, and then writing gives me a lot of ideas for oud. And the thing about oud is that the belly of the instrument is touching your belly, and so you really feel the music. For me, to me, spirituality is really anything that connects you to a higher power, and I think I think creativity in any field or discipline is a pathway to connecting with that higher power, and so the way that the sound vibrations of the oud resonating in my belly, or the scent of the hung, those things really connect me and help me feel centered in a way that I can be open to the higher force.
I've known Nancy since the 90s when you were here. And I remember back then, when you were doing the crochet penis show, that lady got up and started yelling at you. Armenian lady. And it's like 30 years later, Nancy, and I just feel like right when we thought we were like making headway, I feel like you talked about Glendale, what's happening. And it just becomes, as artists, we feel like we take 10 steps forward, then take steps back. And then as Armenian Americans, now when we look at the government, we're right when we thought, okay, we can rely on conservative versus liberal. Liberal side is also doing the same thing as the conservative. So there's no, like who do we look at as our government who can, well, how do you guys feel as artists right now? Do we see light at the end of the tunnel? Do we, it's dismal times.
Yeah.
And when you look at that too, we don't have to always go on.
I feel like I always try to lead with hope. I will say within the last year, 2 years is probably the most hopeless I felt, just seeing everything in front of us and how people are ignoring or choosing to ignore that. But I do feel that, again, we are in a time of great reckoning. I think oftentimes when we have these big shifts, these big kind of zeitgeist moments, and we always kind of backslide, but then things do get better. It's like, an example is, especially for like Black Americans, sometimes people say, oh my gosh, I wish I could go back to the 1920s. It was so great. Like, it was probably just a big party. Wouldn't you just love to go back to the 1920s? And, no, not in any sense of the word. So, of course, there are things that are coming back, and we all say, and of course, those of us on the, I'll use a very general term, of the left, very large umbrella, in 2016, with the election of Trump, we're like, oh my gosh, we're just going back. We're going back to the dark ages and all of these things. But all of this has been percolating in this country for a long time. There are a lot of things that have always been happening. In June of 2020, with everything that was happening with the murders that were coming to light while everyone was at home on our phones and had the time and space to actually pay attention, people were bringing up things that have been happening consistently in this country. Over decades, things that happened years ago, things that happened months ago that you just weren't paying attention to at that time. So there's always difficulties and hardships when we're living under these systems that are steeped very much so in white supremacy, and in a country that refuses to truly reckon with a country. This is Turtle Island, how we are on indigenous land, but a country that refuses to reckon with its actual true founding. But people are now aware, people are now starting to really talk about what does it mean to be American? What is America? This is a country that's founded on stolen land by stolen Black bodies who built this country, exploited immigrant labor. And at least in the education system and what I see from our young people now, that is the biggest sign of hope. You cannot get any of this stuff past them. They are too smart. They have too much access. I mean, they have just the right amount of access. They could even have more access to resources. You tell them one thing and they will go and they will look it up and they will put in that work and do that research. So, shout out to the young people, Gen Z, whatever the next generation is. They give me a lot of hope right now. So I do think it is getting better, and we are in a time where people can be more unapologetic and open about reality and true history and fact. It's just history and fact. It shouldn't be something that's controversial.
As the poet laureate of Glendale, I feel like I should speak about Glendale for a moment here. You know, there was an interesting occasion recently where someone was thinking about moving to Glendale, and they were, we were talking, and they're like, I might move to Glendale, but I don't want to be a Glendale Armenian. And I was like, what does that even mean? Because I'm from Baltimore, and now I live in Glendale. And so it's been very interesting for me since I've moved, to Glendale since January of 2021. I lived here previously from 2015 to 17, but we moved here in 2021 and we're here now, to learn all of these local dynamics and sub-dynamics and, So, last June when all this stuff happened at the school board, it was a big reckoning, but it was part of this nationwide attempt to take the far-right progress that had been achieved at the Supreme Court level and to try to trickle it down into the school boards so that they could ban books, expand the power of marginalizing others, and then using moral panic to try to justify that approach and strategy. So as a newcomer to Glendale, people were always telling me Glendale's very purple, it's not quite blue, it's not quite red, it's purple, you never know, who you're talking to, people have really extreme beliefs here. And on the school board meeting after June 6th, we were gonna go in a larger group and people were like, don't go, apparently the gang Armenian Power is calling out people on social media, and people we were planning to stand in line with starting from 10 a.m. so we could get in at 5 p.m. They decided not to go because they were justifiably concerned for their safety, and I understand that. And I chose to go, not because I'm special, but just because I just felt like it's what I had to do, and there were a lot of other people there. What we've seen in the ensuing months is that a lot of organizing, a lot of energy, and a lot of effort went into being very thoughtful and strategic here in Glendale at the local level to make sure that 2 school board seats that were up for election and the mayoral seat would not fall into the hands of these far-right provocateurs. And that's what happened. And that's what gives me hope, which is that, we had this horrible, very violent, very terrible thing that happened on June 6th that was, the culmination of months and years of anti-LGBTQ plus, distorted misinformation. But at the same time, people have pushed back, and earlier today, and we saw that in the election. It's not just rhetorically speaking, actually people organized, and there was a pushback. Today at the festival, and also I'm working with the Armenian Genocide Commemoration Committee in the city of Glendale, and today at the Artsakh Festival, Gallus LGBTQ plus Armenian Society had a table there. They have a seat at the organizing event. So there's a lot being done to try to expand and get past this very reductive, exclusionary, unnecessary marginalization of the LGBTQ plus Armenian community. And so I would consider that progress at the local level, even though there's still a ton of work to do. And the fact that these provocateurs even made an iota of progress is deeply problematic. So there's still a lot of work to be done. There will always be work to be done. And I don't think there's ever an arrival, but hopefully there's a sense that whatever you're trying to get to, hopefully you don't have to travel too far to get there. So that's still maybe a local perspective.
Can I uplift? I just want to uplift one thing, and this is just posing a question. There's no answer. It's something for folks to think about. But can you imagine, specifically for our local Armenian folks here, can you imagine if all of this energy that was going into the different sides of the community at this time, if all of that energy, specifically from the reactionary folks in our community, was actually harnessed to be in solidarity with all Armenians instead of fighting Armenians who deviate from what they believe is Armenian to actually support our community. Just putting that out there. We can organize when we want to on both sides of things.
I think that, I remember in 2016, the day after Trump was elected, I went to teach my class and my students were crying, and I said, look, there have been terrible times in history, and yes, we've arrived at this moment, but we've also arrived at other moments, and people have been fighting and organizing, and that's just what we're gonna have to do. And I didn't know where this came from, because I felt the same as them. I was like, whoa, oh my God. So I was like, okay, if I can do this and say this to my students, and they're like, yeah, you're right. So I think we have to summon that voice inside us, and I know you have it, Shahe. You're an incredible educator, and there are this audience has so many powerful, amazing artists and activists right here that we can all, I wish everyone could be on this panel and answer that question, because we have so much collective strength and creativity. And I do think as long as we show up, protest in however way we can, keep having conversations, and don't allow silence. You mentioned Audre Lorde, and that one thing Audre Lorde said that I feel is a guiding principle is the transformation of silence into language and action, and that if you can speak your silence, it transforms. And we have to arrive at language and speak what the injustices are in order to find a way to find action and make action happen. And I think imagination is really important, and being pushed, we're in this kind of extremist moment, and perhaps the imagination we have to bring us out of this moment is a hopeful thing that we can keep trying to rely on our imagination to imagine solutions and to imagine the future we want to see.
I mean, I feel like that's a good place to end it, but I will say two things that I hold on to when I'm trying to write now, because I didn't write for many years. I really felt like, oh man, this is like the worst things are ever going to be, and then the pandemic happened, and I lost many family members, and I was like, oh God, this is definitely the worst that's going to happen, and then it just kept getting worse, and I was like, shit, we're never going to end, it's never ending, you know? And two things kind of brought me back, and they bring me back all the time. One of them is something Toni Morrison said when Bush administration was in power, and she said, this is not the time for despair. I'm gonna again butcher it, I don't remember, it's a whole paragraph, just look it up. But she said, this is not the time for despair, this is exactly the time when artists go to work. And that was one, I have it on my laptop, I look at it every day. And the second thing I'm writing about right now, because I'm writing about what it is to write during a genocide. And it's, I went to a museum, I don't remember who the artist was, if anyone in here knows, please tell me because it's driving me insane. But I went to a museum a couple of years ago at the time when I thought things were the worst in my life, and then they got much worse. And I stood in front of a painting at this time when I thought there's like no hope in making art. Like, how could we make art? You know, I'm thinking about like, how could I write a poem? People are dying in the streets. And I looked at this painting and the little placard next to it, I don't remember the painting, I don't remember anything except this placard, and it said, that the artist who made the painting had lost their entire family in the war. This is World War I or II, I don't even remember. Their whole family had been killed, and then they started making art, and they said, there's nothing left to do but make art now. And I thought, all this time I've been thinking about how can I make art as a response to this when really there's nothing to do but to make that art, to push back on it. Because that's like the only beauty, the only thing we do as humans, which is so profoundly beautiful to me, is make beautiful things out of even the worst of it. So those are the two things that give me hope.
I'm sure you still have questions, but we're going to bring it to a close, and maybe you can snag them afterwards if you are going to be hanging out. But I want to make a few closing remarks. But before I do, we wanted to thank Raffi, Carene, Nancy, and Gina for being here, and for your authentic stories, opinions, voices, so authentic. And as Arthur said, we are humbled in your presence, and for all the beautiful imagery, feelings, emotions, truths that you share today to help bring attention to, or not attention, but to bring awareness of important issues and our Armenianness and how that's all intertwined with each other in this very important month of April. I also wanted to say, like Arthur here, I don't think I'll forget the cookie or see the Cookie Monster in the same way. I also wanted to say that I will definitely savor plums when I eat them next, Gina, and I will think twice when I use the word odar. So thank you for that. So in closing, I invite you to support IALA's notable and noble mission, whether you're a writer, reader, or simply someone who cherishes the rich heritage of Armenian literature. There's a place for you within IALA. So together, we would like to invite you to celebrate the stories that connect us, the words that inspire us, and the cultural legacy that binds us. And we really thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being here today and to support this wonderful event. And for more information on IALA's programs, events, and how you can contribute or participate, please visit IALA's website at armenianliterary.org. And if you'd like to be part of our Los Angeles Chapter's email list, you can come and see me, as I'm the coordinator for LA. So unless, Arthur, you have any closing remarks, I think we can bring this to a wrap it up.
Have a good night, y'all.
Thank you.